have to raise my hand on the screen like this.
As a fisherman, I make my living on the coast. So when my son told me about protecting the coast, I thought he was going to tell me to stop fishing. But I finally went to one of them meetings with he, and it opened my eyes. Terms like climate change, storm surge, and beach erosion had me so confused. But Junior showed me that when we got a storm, we lose a bit more of the beach, and how developers, locals, tourists, and the fishing community all have to learn to use the coast without damaging the coast. If we don't do more to protect our coast, we could lose everything.
Like Freddie and Junior, there are many who rely on our coast for their livelihood. The Coastal Zone Management Unit is working to sustainably manage our coastal spaces by mitigating the impacts of climate change for generations to come through updating the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. From monitoring beach levels, restoring mangroves and wetlands, to working with community leaders and private developers, the CZMU is planning for a safer and more resilient coast. See more of Freddie and Junior's story on the CZMU and GIS social media. Play your part to manage and protect our coast, our home, our future. To view the updated ICZM plan and learn more, visit coastal.gov.bb/ICZM plan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you to the fourth in a series of 8 public meetings for the Draft Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan and the Coastal Zone Management Area. My name is Alison Wiggins, and I will be taking through the proceedings this evening. Let me first introduce our team here this afternoon. We have the chairperson of the public inquiry, that is Dr. Yolanda Aline, who is no stranger to development planning and environmental planning in Barbados. We have the team from the Coastal Zone Management Unit, which is headed by Dr. Leo Brewster, who is the director of the unit, Mr. Antonio Rowe, who's the deputy director, Ricardo Arthur, who's a project manager, Ramon Roach, who's a coastal information systems manager, Fabian Hines, the coastal planner, Richard Suku, the marine biologist, and Shamari Cave, our technical officer. Our team, who has helped us to prepare the draft plan and the limits of the Coastal Zone Management Area, is comprised of a team from IH Cantabria in Spain. And that group is headed by Raul Medina Santa Maria, who's a director. Then we have Jonathan McHugh, who was a team leader on this particular consultancy, Maria Marino, Heather Barker, and Renee Gibson. Let me take you through as well what we will be doing this afternoon. So we have the opening remarks by the chairman of the public inquiry. Our director will give you a brief introduction to the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. And then we have presentations by the team leader, Jonathan McHugh, as well as our project manager, Ricardo Arthur. And then we go into the question and answer session, where we expect that you will tell us what you think of the plan and the defined limits of the Coastal Zone Management Area. And then the closing remarks will be given by the Deputy Director of the unit, Antonio Rowe. This evening, as I mentioned, we're here to discuss sub-area 4, and this sub-area stretches from the Choyce in St. Peter to North Point in St. Lucie. Let me take this opportunity now to introduce the chairperson of the public inquiry, Dr. Yolanda Aline.
Thank you very much, Alison. Good evening, everyone. And I join Alison with welcoming you to this, our 4th public consultation for the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. As many of you know, the areas either side of our coastline are zones of intense activity in the water and on the land. It is estimated that approximately 50% of our population and 95% of our tourism-related infrastructure is concentrated in or near the area that we traditionally call our coastal zone. Along with this, you know that we have many institutional facilities, businesses, health, education, services, power stations, and infrastructure in terms of roads and connections in that same zone. So two important observations as we go into this evening session. First, it would be very difficult to manage our coastal areas in an island this size without recognizing the significant impacts of land-based activities from the upper reaches of the watershed all the way through to the coastline on the one hand, and the changing and very intense activity taking place in our marine space on the other hand. As you know, in the marine waters, we have coastal resources, corals, fishing, swimming, shipping, all kinds of things are going on there. The second point I'd like to make is that integrated coastal zone management is absolutely essential to Barbados, as healthy oceans and coastal areas are vital to our economic future. So this draft Barbados Integrated Coastal Zone Plan is a timely intervention in the context of increasing climate and disaster risk, combined with more coastal development and intense use of our marine areas. Now is the time for all our residents to become involved in the integrated and coordinated management of our coastal areas. We, the general public, and key stakeholders are all custodians of our coast, and this consultation process is an opportunity for everyone to get involved. I hope you've had a chance to read the draft plan, but even if you haven't, I hope that you would listen carefully to some of the proposed policy tools and guidelines that are being put forward for our coastal areas management, and give meaningful feedback to support what is there, improve what is there, or provide alternative options to how you think we should address some of the issues that are being dealt with in this particular sub area, and in an effort to strengthen our coastal areas management. So I encourage you to clear your heads, take your notes during the presentations, and which Alison has just outlined for you. And at the end of that, when we have the question and answer, give some constructive viewpoints on how we can actually improve and strengthen our coastal areas management, which this evening is focused on sub-area 4, from the Choyce to North Point. And I thank you and welcome you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aline. Let me just emphasize that this is a plan for all of us. We at the Coastal Zone Management Unit are also vital stakeholders. Some of us live along the coast. Some of us work along the coast. Our office used to be at the coast in Bay Street. So we are vital stakeholders as well. But we want your opinion. We want you to tell us how we can improve the plan. Give us alternative perspective on the plan as well. And when we open the question and answer session, we are giving you the ability to speak to us. We are giving you two options. You can either type your comment or your question using the question and answer button at the bottom of your page, or you can raise your hand, and then we'll give you the ability to speak to us. We really look forward to the question and answer session. At this point in time, let me introduce the director of the Coastal Zone Management Unit, who will give us an introduction to the data plan and tell us something about this sub area. Dr. Brewster.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alison. Good evening to everybody. Thanks for tuning in. What I'm going to try and do is give you a quick run through on the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan that we have just recently concluded. And in essence, starting with a brief story and background of the whole concept behind the Integrated Coastal Zone Management process. The first plan was done by Delcan International in 1995, where it focused primarily on the west and south coast of the island and was a compilation of all the technical work that was done as part of the pre-feasibility and the feasibility studies with pre-investment initiatives along the way. It documented a lot of information on the reef systems, the engineering structures, and the coastal ecosystems found along the way, as well as the beach monitoring results that were being performed by the office, and identified new beach monitoring locations for us to implement work at. The second plan was done in 1998 by Sir William Halcrow and Partners, and that was based on a comprehensive study that was done for the entire East Coast, stretching from Maycox Bay all the way around to South Point. It was the first time this level of detailed work had been done for that area. And that too tried to capture, in essence, all the physical, geographical, and bathymetric characteristics or seafloor characteristics for the area. We also worked on redefining the West and South Coast study from 1995 so that it would be consistent with the East Coast data. And we also identified through that project in 98 a set of priority areas for integrated coastal zone management. We divided the coastline into 8 sub-areas, each being uniquely different from the other, and therefore characterizing the space more effectively. The third plan, which is being generated this year, 2021, was done by IH Cantabria, as Alison rightfully pointed out, and now provides a comprehensive look as to how integrated coastal zone management can implement and integrate climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction into the integrated coastal zone management process. So why is the update needed? We recognize that climate change is upon us. Climate change is real. We've also recognized that based on the impacts from coastal erosion and flooding, we've seen some problems that are being exacerbated over time. Modern coastal management delivery models now have to require Barbadians to become more familiar with the goods and services of the coastal space and the issues that it faces. And then on top of that, we also have to look at how we can adapt a new strategy to better deal with the climate and disaster risk considerations to make the coastline more resilient towards these activities and deliver comprehensive integrated coastal zone management principles and lessons that we can take from the international arena and apply to Barbados. We're also looking to recognize that implementing risk resilient integrated coastal zone management is not a simple task. Now, considering the differences between the two plans, first of all, in 1998, the plan was a 3-volume document. It was the volumes themselves focused on the policy framework, a separate plan for the Atlantic coast, and a separate plan for the Caribbean coast. It developed guidance for management of the coastal uses and development and regulations for the coastal area in Barbados generally. And up to now, it has been addressing those through the policy framework guidelines document. It also focused on integrating the role and function of all agencies involved in integrated coastal zone management, the first time that was being done. And it also focused on the institutional strengthening of the coastal zone management unit to address its expanding mandate. This new plan, 2020, is a 10-year plan. It stretches between 2020 to 2030, and it adopts the integrated disaster risk management climate change adaptation approach towards supporting effective coastal planning and incorporates the latest results from the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program and the supporting National Coastal Risk Information Planning Platform, all of which was generated out of the Coastal Risk Project. It focuses on improving the capacity of Coastal Zone Management Unit to integrate the climate change considerations into the coastal management process and identifies new reporting structures for monitoring and evaluating the achievements of the plan in the short, medium, and long term. This is something that was lacking from the last plan. The intended impact of the plan is supposed to provide detailed guidance for the management of the coastal resources, its uses, development, and the regulation along the coastline. It still features at its core the island system management approach, where it recognizes that terrestrial and coastal resources together are relevant for the protection of natural resources. And more importantly, that when something happens in the center of the island, it can almost reach the coastline in a very short period of time, less than 2 hours in some instances. And it focuses on the relation between the protection of the resources to reduce climate change, and increasingly how CZMU is going to use its routine remit in the evaluation of coastal development applications to achieve its objectives. The identification of the boundaries for both the coastal zone management area and the new zone of influence that can impact that coastal zone management area have also been identified as part of the plan to ensure that you can then have more collaborative partnerships in the future. Cost of doing nothing. Well, people will wonder if you don't do anything, what would happen? The reality is that if you look at the amount of critical infrastructure found along the coastline, you definitely have to do something. In addition, when you're looking at the inundation areas, that can happen as a result of coastal flooding from storm surge and rainfall events, they have significant impacts that need to be addressed, and mitigation measures have to be presented and agreed to at the policy level in order to achieve the type of better sustainable management of the coastline that we want. And while the costings for the mitigation measures may not have been fully determined yet through the plan, when it comes down to the decision between spending money on prevention or spending monies on repair, we're going to err to the side of prevention rather than focusing on repair, which can lead to greater downtime. Now, there were key policy outcomes in the 98 and the 2020, and I think for right now, I'll just focus on the new outcomes being generated as part of the 2020 plan. And they're really and truly looking at sustainable socioeconomic development is achieved along the coastline. We want to ensure that coastal resources are protected and effectively managed. We want to look at climate and disaster risk adaptive capacities being strengthened across government. We also want to look to try to ensure that integrated coastal zone management is delivered through a coordinated governance arrangement, and that capacity for integrated coastal zone management delivery is strengthened for all the relevant sectors. So it isn't only just the coastal zone management unit, but all other sectors now, because of the cross-cutting impacts of climate change and disaster risk reduction, have to and need to be strengthened. That research, understanding, and knowledge and outreach is effectively achieved. They have to carry on in that process and in that way. Now, the plan structure itself, if you've read it, you'll see it looks like it's a pretty thick document, but it's divided into 5 main areas. The first one, the first area or section sets the scene for risk resiliency. The second part looks at the creation of the adaptive pathway that we think is the most important, where we identify the pathway priorities, issues identification and assessment, looking at national management priorities, etc. And then part C starts to get into the meat of the matter, where we're looking at national guidance mechanisms in order to achieve the role and function that we want. And then part D goes into the individual 8 sub-areas and breaks it out into main themes, sub-area descriptions, looks at the main issues and strategic objectives within each sub-area, the development plannings and setbacks for the sub-areas, the action briefs that are going to be required. And then the final part of the plan looks towards how the implementation of this plan is going to be rolled out, what the role and function of the expanded mandate of the Coastal Zone Management Unit will be, and how it will continue with its interlinkages with the other agencies and their potential future rollout and function. In short, government is ramping up its efforts to address the country's coastal vulnerabilities and face the increasing threat of climate change. This new plan aims to introduce and improve coastal risk resiliency along the coastline in order to make it more risk resilient to climate change. The draft plan presents methods to redefine the boundaries of the coastal zone management area, which have to be clearly defined in legislation, as there's an integral link between the legislation for the management area definition and the role and function of the plan. The plan itself provides a new integrated approach to coastal management, with its core focus to reduce the exposure of critical coastal infrastructure to hazards. It also looks at the island systems management still being the central component to the integrated coastal zone management system for Barbados. And finally, the plan uses the latest knowledge and science on climate change, coastal risks affecting the island, to produce guidelines, legislation, regulations, and standards and advisories for the effective management of that space. I think with that brief summary, that sets the tone for what's going to be following. And I'd like to hand it back to Alison now, who will continue. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brewster, for your informative presentation. Let me take this opportunity to remind you that it's just a sheer coincidence that we are having this particular consultation in the hurricane season, and particularly in light of the tropical wave which passed just early this morning. I hope that all of you are doing well and that you had no negative impacts from the passing of that tropical wave. Let me introduce the next speaker on this evening's agenda, and that is Mr. Jonathan McHugh, And he will be followed at the end, some closing in terms of the presentation by the project manager, Ricardo Arthur. Mr. McHugh will be doing some polls along the way to keep you being interactive in this session, but he'll be presenting the general themes and ideas about the sub area and what are the tools that we are using to manage the sub areas, bearing in mind that it's not only on the landward side that we have resources, but we also have our marine resources which we want to protect as well. Let me toss it over to you, Jonathan. Wish you well in your presentation.
Thank you, Alison, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. We're going to, before I go into the presentations, we're just going to use some of these technical tools to get everybody up to speed with us learning about you and us learning a little bit more about your experience on the coast. And we do this for each sub area, and tonight's no different. So we'll be, I'm going to be sharing my screen to identify the start and to basically set the tone for your initial involvement on the project. Tonight we're going to have an early four questions, and you'll see a question coming up on the screen, which will be identifying whether you are currently aware of the 1998 existing ICZM plan, as Dr. Brewster has communicated. We'd like you to use your computers to give a quick answer to this simple question. Either yes, you're aware of it, no, you're not aware of it, or you're uncertain. So if you can just give your answer to that, the team will compile the results and we'll be able to sort of show the graphic on the screen in front of us. So the results, just to test the system, are showing that a good 71% of you are aware of the plan, and probably about 30% are not. So we're going to have another question. And that question is with regard to the current plan, which is being communicated to you tonight and has been launched since World Oceans Day on the 7th of June. And this question is, are you, or have you actually been able to review the draft updated 2020 plan? And the options are, I did not know about it. Option 2 is, I know of it, but I've not reviewed it. And option 3 is you've been extremely good and diligent students and you've reviewed it in detail. And I'm sure you'll have a few questions in the question and answer session. So give us your view and we will determine tonight's audience, how au fait they are with the details of the current plan. And tonight it's looking like we have a very diligent audience. We've got about 71% of you that have had a look at this plan on the CZM website in some detail, so that's excellent. Our third question is about yourself, to understand what are your key coastal interests, not necessarily for sub-area 4. I think it's a general question, whether you use the coast for personal recreation, whether you live on the coast, or whether your business is reliant on healthy coastal resources and their long-term protection. So your score to that would be quite valuable as we collect all the 8 sub-area meetings together. And tonight's audience, a good 83% are using this for personal recreation, which is going to be quite a key focus of my presentation and probably the question and answer session. Our final question, before I move on to my brief presentations, is understanding what type of stakeholder you are. So give us an idea whether you are a member of the general public, whether you're working within the private sector, whether you are representing a public institution, or whether you work or are engaged within a non-government association. And tonight's audience is essentially compiled an interesting mix. So we have a healthy mix, I would say, of people tonight. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. The following presentation is designed to just briefly get you on the same page with regard to the global and regional significance of climate change and how this can manifest itself in terms of more localized disaster events that may present themselves in this or other sub areas. And as Alison said, I'm very cognizant of the issues that have been facing the country over the last 24 hours. And our dialogue these days, as you all know, has been regrettably overtaken by COVID-19. However, the pandemic is not the only global threat that we face that's running in parallel, and that is that the climate crisis continues. And with reference to the climate story, you as Caribbean people are therefore at the forefront of this planetary threat. And your communities and businesses remain acutely vulnerable to the dangers of rising seas and other impacts that are accelerating with climate change. And these are constituting a real risk should global average temperatures exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So with specific reference to Barbados, much of its critical infrastructure, as you know, is located within the defined coastal zone. Having said that, there is incessant pressure globally to continue with a business as usual state of affairs, meaning that all built assets, whether they're critical or not, are being pressured to be defended from various coastal hazards, such as flood risk. However, everything cannot be protected via the adoption of hard engineering solutions on the coast. And the cost of this globally would be astronomical. I mean, in fact, the adaptation costs in developing countries is currently being estimated at $70 billion per year. And it's expected to reach up to $300 billion a year by the end of the decade in 2030. So the climate and disaster story, therefore, needs to be understood in totality. And it's this which the revised ICZM plan is actually at the center of. As you can see on this slide, society depends on the effective functioning of a range of sectors. And these can be seen as different colors, notably yellow for financial, brown for infrastructure, blue for social services, and green for natural resources. And these sectors are all faced by a range of risks, including those related to tourism, which could be seen, or they could be as assets, or they could be finance related. National development, such as manufacturing, health, education, or social service related, or cross-cutting risks. And you'll see that coastal and ocean resources fall under this latter category. And hence the whole ICZM planning process, which is being communicated to you this evening, is critical in playing a major role in delivering a sustainable national planning outcome for Barbados. This slide aligns the same identified sectors against key climate hazards that I identified to you earlier, namely increased temperature, increased rainfall patterns, but perhaps most key to this evening's talk relates to changes in extreme events such as hurricanes and storms and sea level rise. And the core hazards that require high priority attention, you'll be able to see in red with the black oval around them. So the revised ICZM plan therefore recognizes the importance of taking a holistic approach to adaptation and resiliency in order to respond to the impacts of climate change. So when I talk about coastal resources, what do I mean? Well, these can include cultural resources that are specific to the Barbados coast, valued seascapes such as this evening's sub-area at Pico Tenerife. Though more commonly, these are understood as being coastal habitats or ecosystems such as beaches, coral reefs, wetlands, or coastal cliffs and caves. And so protecting coastal resources, therefore, really needs to be a national priority. And it can be seen in sub-area 4 that the light yellow color that you see demonstrates large areas of coral or Gorgonian platform reef habitats. And these predominate a lot in the nearshore and offshore areas of sub-area 4. And there are also small pocket beaches They're frequented by turtle species for nesting purposes. So our next poll question is devoted to capturing the key message of this very quick overview on coastal resources. And the outcome result will help us to confirm the methodology that's been adopted for the creation of the newly defined coastal zone management area. So you'll see on the screen that I'm going to be asking you to rank the range of coastal habitats in order of importance. And you'll see a series of buttons there between 1, of low importance, to 5, very important. And we want to ask you to give a score for beaches and dunes as a coastal resource, coastal cliffs and caves, wetlands, swans, swamps and ponds, coral reefs and seabeds, and cultural resources, and finally, geological formations, landscapes, and seascapes. So I'll give you 25 seconds to quickly go through those. Give me your views, whether you believe that particular resource is of low importance to Barbados or of high importance. Keep your assessment on a national level. We'll dive into the sub-area specifics in due course. So the scores are going to be coming through, and we are seeing 100% for beaches and dunes of very high importance. Coastal cliffs and caves, another high, 78%. Similar scores for wetlands, swamps and ponds. 100% for coral reefs and seabeds. And for cultural resources, more of a human aspect, there's a bit more of a mix, but majority are certainly of the mid to very high range. And with regard to geological or landscapes and seascapes of particular relevance to this evening's talk, again, we have a 67% score. So that's very useful, because what I'm going to be just talking about now is to build upon the previous talk, coupled with that poll question finding, to demonstrate the approach that we've adopted towards revising the boundaries of the coastal zone management area. And it provides an overview as to how new and innovative setback classifications are being proposed. Technical details of both of these issues can be found in volume 2 of the ICZM plan. So the first question that he's posing is, well, why do we need a coastal zone management area? And the simple answer is that there is a formal mandate on the coastal zone management unit to protect coastal resources as defined within the CZM Act of 1998. It also helps to define the boundary or the geographic scope of this revised ICZM plan. So this coastal zone management area is the area where all relevant coastal resources apply, in addition to those socioeconomic activities that may have an impact on coastal resource health, status, or integrity. As well as the current Coastal Zone Management Act of 1998, the more recent Planning and Development Act of 2019 states that any new development proposal that is identified within this defined coastal zone management area shall have regard to the provisions and guidelines set out in the ICZM plan. This basically means that the unit will be acting in an advisory capacity to all statutory authorities on all relevant policies, regulations, and advisories that apply within this coastal zone management area. But it should be understood that the coastal zone management area is not the same as a development setback distance, and this difference shall be explained a little later in this presentation. The recent poll that you undertook demonstrated that a range of coastal resources all need to be considered to help determine the spatial extent of the coastal zone management area. So put simply, highly technical surveys and analyses carried out by the unit over the past decade or so have all been used to help define the inland and offshore limits of this coastal zone management area. And this pays due consideration to the geographic footprint of coastal habitats, in addition to cultural, geological, landscape or seascapes and the availability of the presence of coastal infrastructure. And in tandem with this, the latest predictions of coastal hazard inland limit impacts, a set of detailed criteria have also been used to help determine the inland and offshore limits of each separate coastal resource. For example, you'll see that for coral reefs, the criteria used is related to the extent of living shallow water coral reef ecosystems, which is estimated at being close to the 150-meter bathymetric contour. Whereas defined coastal landscape protection areas and national park landscapes, as denoted in the physical development plan and as is the main focus of this sub-area 4, should command a 200-meter inland buffer from the coastline. So the outcome of this new analysis work is a coastal zone management area that's variable in its extent around the country. Exact coordinates of this are presented within the revised ICZM plan, which is new and differs from the 1998 approach, and details of which are included as a specific order entitled the Coastal Zone Management Area Boundaries Order of 2021, which includes specific longitude, latitude coordinates, each being approximately 50 meters apart. And this is included as part of the existing Coastal Zone Management Act of 1998. And you'll see from this slide in green that the Coastal Zone Management Area in Sub-Area 4 has updated inland and offshore limits, which were originally established within the original plan. And you can see this through the blue diagonal lines on the slide. The landward area also includes the minimum 30-meter setback from the high water mark that was established in the physical development plan of 2017. And you'll see, and it's noted by those red arrows, that this differs from the approach adopted in 1998 by Halcrow, in that inland limits were commonly defined by coastal roads, and that you can see here in Sub-Area 4. The seaward limit does remain similar, as you can see, to the offshore limit defined in 1998, with a slight additional increase in extent close to Pico Tenerife. This contains key marine resource and habitats, plus protected and restricted marine areas, any areas of outstanding seascape value, plus the surf zone limits, which is important to understand active sediment transport, and that can influence the pocket beach profile shape that does occur within this area. A separate zone of influence is also new, and this is defined, which extends from the seaward limit of the coastal zone management area out to the 12-mile territorial limit. Here, the role of the unit will be to raise awareness on marine developments to both the public and the private sectors, to civil society and the general public, or where future considerations of an offshore activity are being raised as part of a separate yet parallel blue economy strategy, which some of you may know is currently underway in Barbados. And this may help to provide advice on the development of joint initiatives to promote the conservation and sustainable exploitation of coastal resources within this zone of influence. So before we move on to discuss this new approach defined for development setbacks, I just want to pose another simple poll question specifically on the coastal zone management area. And the question for you to answer is as follows. Do you agree with the new revised delimitation of this coastal management area compared to that which was defined in 1998? And you have five options here. The first one is yes, I understand the reasoning for the change in totality. Secondly, yes, I understand the change, but in parts it appears too wide, inland and offshore. Thirdly, yes, I understand, but in parts it appears too narrow, both inland and offshore. Fourthly, no, I think we should stick with what was set up in 1998. Or 5, you have no real view at this moment in time. So a quick answer to just select one of those, and we'll see what the collective evening score is on that aspect. And tonight's audience are giving quite a high priority for it's understood and the change is accepted at 86%, which is quite a good, positive outcome. So thank you for that. We'll move on, and I'm going to briefly outline now how the revised ICZM plan is to use this coastal zone management area to improve climate resiliency into development planning in sub-area 4 through the use of planning setbacks. So why is this needed? Well, setbacks in fact are a key tool that's often used by coastal planners globally. They refer to areas where development should be restricted or where specific provisions need to be imposed or applied to ensure the safety of structures, people, wider communities, especially in the context of climate change. And in Barbados, setback policies are not new, though historically, linear distances selected were often not technically justified due to a poor understanding of climate-related impacts. Consequently, the currently defined 30-metre distance from mean high water, as defined within the Physical Development Plan, and also as stated within the new Planning and Development Act, has been deemed as, in times, as somewhat arbitrary. This is why the revised ICZM plan and associated maps, which I'll briefly show you in the next presentation, represent a new way forward to better guide development planning within the coastal zone management area. And what the revised ICZM plan is now able to offer is a suite of refined setback distances and categories that are not only dictated by improved scientific understanding, but it's designed to not stand in the way of development to take place, even within defined limits, so long as they comply with necessary environmental impact assessment regulations and technical studies are undertaken as deemed necessary by either town and country planning or the Coastal Zone Management Unit or by the Ministry of Public Works. So regarding setback, a series of policy types are proposed depending upon the spatial topography, the conservation or the landscape value, and the level of coastal risk that's known for a specific location. And specific points to note with regard to these setbacks are as follows. Firstly, they only apply to new constructions or developments that are planned after the approval of this ICZM plan. Secondly, they cannot be retroactively enforced for existing developments. That's an important point to stress. Thirdly, they only apply to major developments defined by the Physical Development Plan of 2017. So in general, all new or expanded major developments shall need to be located landward of any flood inundation setback limit. And as mentioned just now, it's important to realize that even in the case of major developments, their construction could still take place within the defined setback limit, so long as the developer carries out satisfactory studies and has delivered a sufficient evidence through the environmental impact assessment process. And such studies need to demonstrate that new knowledge of flooding or erosion hazards already produced by the unit or via the National Coastal Risk Information Planning Platform system. Make sure it's embraced, and from this information that robust and effective risk reduction measures are included into any new design. So what do these setbacks look like in reality for sub-area 4? Well, you can see that they include the following possibilities. Firstly, in orange, you'll see this minimum 30-metre setback distance as defined within the Physical Development Plan. And this remains constant for everywhere around the country in the coastal zone management area. But this minimum distance may then be enhanced subject to the hazards or the resource protection needs of a specific location. And this extra distance will be determined by separate technical analysis. And this can include the following. You'll see in blue a cliff collapse setback zone, and this is variable and is classified into 7 setback categories according to cliff type as set out by some detailed work by Golder Associates in 2017. And as you can see from the grey box to the right-hand side of the screen, that this can range from 18 meters and inland to 65 meters. In yellow, you'll see a setback, a landscape setback, and this is variable and can range between 100 meters through to 200 meters, where it is defined within a landscape protection area, including within the national park. This slide shows the detailed geotechnical analysis mapping work that was carried out in 2017 from the Choyce to North Point, in other words, this evening's sub-area 4 discussion. And it demonstrates that the risk class categories in different colours, and each of those colours denotes a level of cliff failure probability. And from that probability, a suite of guidelines for future developments have been defined, and these are encapsulated within the revised ICZM plan with specific reference to setback limits. Away from cliffs, but for more low-lying coastal areas, in this instance, such as River Bay in sub-area 4, setbacks are proposed to include the following possibilities. As above, the minimum 30-meter setback in red can be seen, and that applies to everywhere in the coastal zone management area. And this minimum distance can then be enhanced subject to the hazards or the resource protection needs of a specific location. And this is determined by the technical analysis, and it can be demonstrated by what you see here as what's called a climate change adaptation setback. You'll see that in paler blue, close to the River Bay area. And again, this is variable, and it's estimated using latest IPCC sea level rise scenario predictions. And additional setback distances are then recommended based on these IPCC sea level rise prediction scenarios. So now I'll add to the work that Dr. Brewster mentioned earlier, and I'm going to just spend a few moments to talk you through key parts of the revised ICZM plan, so you're aware of the level of detail that's contained within it and how it seeks to address the issues that are being faced in sub-area 4. And put simply, as you can see on the screen, the ICZM plan for sub-area 4 shall, at its core, seek to provide the guidance needed to protect the coastal landscape and the beauty of sub-area 4, including Little Bay and River Bay, amongst other areas. I shall focus on these more local issues in a moment. And this should be, the issues should be achieved via a range of tools. One of them could be enforcing building guidelines, another may be the enforcement of setback restrictions, all designed to provide opportunities for informed recreational development that will be also in line with the Barbados National Plan, which has recently been produced. Dr. Brewster mentioned the details of Part C of the plan. I'll just talk about this in a little bit more detail. What you see on the screen here represents the various 10 general policy guidance notes which have been prepared. And the details provided here provide the guidance for risk resilient ICZM to actually be achieved from a national perspective. And these address the 6 policy outcomes which Dr. Brewster identified and have been articulated in more detail in volume 1 of the plan. And you can see that these 10 topics are covered in quite some detail with the national management priorities that are relevant to the whole of the coastal zone management area of Barbados. Perhaps all of these actually have relevance to sub-area 4 in one way or another. Each topic provides a description of the current status of that particular theme, followed by the possible national implications of not considering that particular guidance topic, and the impact that this may have on delivering sustainable ICZM for Barbados. From that, detailed management guidance is then presented on how each particular topic should be applied in a manner that better embraces climate and disaster resilience. Finally, the actions are listed with recommendations on suitable lead organisations to take forward each proposed action timescale for implementation is given, be it short, medium, or longer term. And then a series of key performance indicators are set out, which are going to help to use to measure progress during the lifespan of the ICZM plan up to 2030. All the guidance included within Part C is developed to ensure consideration of key disaster risk management pillars. And these pillars are shown on this slide, namely risk reduction, response and readiness, response execution, such as activities during a specific disaster event, and recovery, which includes issues such as risk financing. And these 4 R's, if you like, illustrate measures which public and private institutions, corporates, civil society, and communities in Barbados need to adopt in order to reduce the impact of disasters or climate change within the defined coastal zone management area. They also illustrate how the government of Barbados needs to react during and immediately after a disaster, followed by the steps to best recover from natural events after it's occurred. So Part C identifies which of these 4 R's are most applicable to the national guidance topic provided. For example, you see on the screen for the topic of beach management that the relevant disaster risk management pillars of most relevance are risk reduction, response and readiness, and response execution. For a specific guidance, one of the 10, which is public awareness and stakeholder participation, you'll see in this table that preparedness and response that are key disaster risk management cycle phases of relevance. And in fact, these tables are produced for each of the 10 general guidance themes, showing relevant legislation, ICZM policy outcomes, and policy goals. Action briefs are then produced for each theme, and these contain a range of actions, not necessarily sub-area specific, though certainly of relevance to each sub-area. Lead and support actors are defined, how the action relates to others, plus the timescales for delivery. And finally, at actions, all indicators defined usually present a series of monitoring and implementation indicators to help the Coastal Zone Management Unit to identify the performance of that particular guidance action and to allow them to make change as necessary. Part E focuses on ICZM Plan implementation. And this will be a long-term and continuous process that involves a range of agencies, institutions, and authorities, and it's often known as the whole of government approach. Some elements require immediate action and will be straightforward to incorporate into the day-to-day operations of a responsible agency. And in certain situations, elements can be built into existing arrangements or require private individuals and the general public to support a specific implementation action. There may also be the need for new procedures and practices developed over time because of the considerable scope and variety of topics that are covered by the plan. And that includes new emerging issues that may arise. Importantly, the cross-sectoral nature of many objectives to be achieved in the plan will require maximum coordination and collaboration amongst all government levels and agencies. As shown in the diagram, all 6 ICZM policy outcomes are proposed to be achieved through the compliance to 4 priority areas as set out in the pillars on this diagram. And you can see that includes the pillar of collaboration, capacity to continue, commitment, and communication. And more details of these can be determined from reading Part E of the report. A clear roadmap, as shown in this slide, is also designed to link the various national guidance actions as presented in Part C to the 6 ICZM policy outcomes. And each specific action is then assigned to one or a range of ICZM policy outcomes as appropriate. They're then assigned a roadmap timeline as shown in the different colored stars, namely short term as a roadmap 1 in green, the medium term, roadmap 2 in yellow, and roadmap 3, the long term, which will be between 5 and 10 years. And you can see that Part E goes into detail into a range of important supporting implementation topics, including information needs and data management, education, training and public outreach, institutional and capacity related needs, evaluation and monitoring procedures, and importantly, financial considerations. On this latter point, no formal figure has currently been set with regards to the budget required to formally implement this ICZM plan. However, following these 8 separate events and this public inquiry process, efforts shall be undertaken to fine-tune the range of actions proposed so that a more targeted value can be placed on plan delivery over the coming remaining period of this plan. So my final presentation, just for the next few moments, will build on the earlier presentations that focuses briefly on the specific features of sub-area 4, coupled with a brief description of the various maps that have been produced for the sub-area. And the focus is placed on topics which we hopefully will elicit discussion with you on, firstly, keeping the rural character, such as the landscape and seascape value. Secondly, on coastal recreational opportunities, such as walks and hiking, or what is often termed now as blue health. And thirdly, cliff stability and what our technical work is telling us. So in sub-area 4, nearby coastal communities include Boscobel to the south, moving north to Rockfield, and moving further north again to Flatfield, which is near North Point and Animal Flower Cave area. A range of cultural resources are also present, including Horseshoe Bay, River Bay, Jones Bay, Chandler's Bay, and south to Cove Bay, and including the amazing vista of Pico Tenerife. In fact, locations such as River Bay and Pico Tenerife are, as you know, extremely popular for recreation and cliff walks, and the actions which have been defined within the plan we'll come on to discuss those matters in more detail. Coastal infrastructure is relatively minor throughout the sub-area, except for River Bay and Cove Bay, where small-scale infrastructures exist. From a hazard perspective, this coastline is predominantly exposed to high swells, waves, and winds from the Atlantic coast and displays a fairly barren clifftop landscape. Cliff erosion and cliff collapse, however, are the key coastal hazards that are most pertinent to this sub-area 4, especially between the Choyce and Rocky Bay. So whilst this area of coast presents opportunities for ecotourism and recreational activities, including the ongoing discussion about coastal pathways, coastal path networks, and the promotion of blue health, there's another issue which I'm sure you're all aware of, and that is the presence of sargassum, in addition to cliff slippage that represents, both of them representing real challenges in key spots of this sub-area, including River Bay. And these situations are important to embrace as they threaten the safety and the use of the coastal space within these key settlement areas. And this can have impacts on the traction that is actually then developed in terms of pushing forward local tourism development plans, which I know have been discussed for this area in the past. This slide is taken from Part D of the revised plan, and based on the risks and the features known in sub-area 4, as I've just shown, it shows that a series of possible actions could be considered. And you'll see on the left-hand side that each possible action assigned for sub-area 4 is aligned to the revised general guidance topics, which I've already discussed with you. And these can be found in a lot more detail in Part C of the plan. For example, you'll see that each action is given a unique code, and highlighted in pink, you'll see a couple of examples for discussion. Firstly, under the general guidance topic of development, planning and setbacks, an action is defined to prepare and distribute guidelines to enforce cliff collapse setback in sub-area 4 for developers and public agencies. Likewise, to support the coastal biodiversity general theme, an action is set to produce guidelines or strategies for the removal of sargassum in rocky cliff areas. Finally, to support the public awareness general theme, an action is set to identify local stakeholders at the community level and private developers in the area to promote new ecotourism opportunities. And so this in many ways could be targeted at sort of reinvigorating the concept of national coastal trail or a path around the country, or at least within sub-area 4, thus maximising the amazing beauty of this wild part of the Atlantic coast for locals and visitors alike. And of course, as I've said before, a lot more detail on these topics can be found within Part C and D of the plan. And I urge you to spend time to look at those if you've not had the opportunity to do so. This slide demonstrates the key that has been produced for all the description related maps of Part D of the plan. And you'll see that these maps only show environmental features, natural or restricted areas, coastal classifications, such as whether the coast is eroding, accreting or stable, and any associated flood related hazards falling within the defined coastal zone management area. And we can see in the southeast part of sub-area 4 that from Foster's Funland through to Rocks Point, that the natural coast is cliffed, and these in part are experiencing medium or moderate levels of cliff failure and slippage. And as a consequence of these fixtures and with regard to setback policies, we can see in this part of sub-area 4 that there are clear recommendations for landscape setback up to the limit of the coastal zone management area, which roughly represents 200 metres inland. Specific cliff collapse setback distances are also defined, which shall be subject to the different cliff classifications given to this area and as defined in that slide which I showed you a little earlier. For the remaining stretch up to North Point, low-lying River Bay and close by Sandy Hill, is clear to see that these transitions from low-lying areas to medium failure cliffs continue in a northwesterly direction up to North Point and onwards onto the area close to Animal Flower Cave. And as a consequence of these features, and with regard to setback policies, we can see in this part of sub-area 4 that there are recommendations for landscape setback up to the coastal zone management area. Flood inundation setbacks are also assigned to the area close to Sandy Hill. Specific cliff collapse setback distances are also defined. And again, as I've said, these are subject to the different cliff classifications that have been given in the earlier part of the presentation. So that gives you a bit of a story as to what's in the plan and the level of detail that the maps have produced. So in light of that and this quick overview of sub-area 4, I'm going to just introduce one final question, which will lead us quite neatly into the group question and answer session. And this question is one of two. It is asking you whether you feel that for sub-area 4, that new engineering measures, whether those are hard, soft, or a mix, are needed to support the protection, rehabilitation, or the management of coastal habitats. So if you think that engineering is the priority, you need to press close to number 5. If you don't think they're a priority, it's more like number 1. The second question is whether you feel new social measures that support improved vulnerable community resilience is needed. Again, if you don't think that's needed, hit number 1. If you think that's greatly needed, it's more like a number 5. The third question focuses on whether you feel that new economic measures are needed in sub-area 4 to support local fisher folk, tourist beaches, the national recreational walkways, or specific marine area management interventions. So again, if you don't think those are needed, it's more like a 1. If you think those are a high priority, it'll be a number 5. So I'll give you 10 seconds to give your views. The results of that will cast the detailed discussion for the remaining question and answer session. And our results. So from an engineering perspective, quite interestingly, we're getting reasonably high scores. 38% have scored that as a 4 in this area. With regard to social measures, as I would have thought we would be getting, yeah, we're getting 4s and 5s for social related measures, and likewise for economic measures. So I think if you were to sort of get a generic sort of feel for those results, it's looking very much that supporting measures to enhance risk resilient ICZM don't necessarily need to be from an engineering perspective, but I think a complementarity of socioeconomic interventions would initiate a suitable sustainable engineering approaches for that coast. So Alison, I will pass back to yourself and we'll initiate the question and answer session.
Actually, now we have Mr. Ricardo Arthur, who's going to give you an economic perspective of how the plan will benefit the average person. Ricardo?
Hi, good night, everyone. Alison, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. I hope that all of you can see the screen and you can start the presentation.
Yeah, I can see it.
I'm just trying to get it.
Right.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about that. Need to move this. Okay. So this little cartoon represents the current environment in which some development is done in Barbados, where we have a developer who has incentives to maximize the investment potential of the land parcel, seeking to maximize space and get as close to the high water mark as possible, as close to the cliff edge. And then we have the regulatory agency who is seeking to protect our natural resources, trying their best to convince the developer why they should adhere to our policies. And I think that the use of the economic tool, because when we talk about the incorporation of disaster risk management, we're really talking about adding a new tool to our existing toolkit. And we've always been looking at hazard analysis. We've improved the science, but now instead of just looking at a storm surge lane and encouraging a setback, we're looking at financial losses, and we're speaking a different language, which I think provides a common ground. I'll go into explain that a little bit more. Before I get into the economic analysis part of it, it's important to know the improved science. So this sub area has a lot of cliff, vulnerable cliff. And if you look at these two photos, they basically illustrate the work that was done. The guys were in the field flying a drone, and that drone provided measurements along the entire cliff edge. In the past, the setback was based on an estimate of the undercut because there was no accurate way to measure that undercut. Now we have, and the next slide will show you, now we have very accurate measurements along the entire cliff to the point where we can actually produce a 3D virtual image of the cliff face, and we know exactly where the undercut is. So if you look at the image in the lower left-hand corner, what you will see is a yellow hatch area, which actually represents the accurate extent of the undercut. Going beyond that, we're also looking at the load-bearing capacity of the rock. So when we come to speak to you now about a setback in these areas, it's not just based on an assumption of cliff recession and an approximate location of undercut. It's actually based on engineering analysis of where is the safe location, the closest safe location for you to place any loads on the cliff edge. Right. So this, going into the economic analysis now. So this graphic basically, in a nutshell, illustrates the value of coastal zone management unit to the economy of Barbados. So the coastal and marine assets are managed to ensure that they continue to provide ecosystem goods and services to the people of the country. We are now at the stage where we are seeking to actually look at that economic value. So whether it be the natural environment in terms of beaches, the opportunity for recreation, exercise, the cultural value of those beaches, or whether it be the built environment in terms of coastal properties and coastal tourism on a whole, and what that provides in terms of jobs. We're looking at it and actually quantifying the benefit flows. And this is basically the role of coastal. Managing these resources to maintain the flow of the benefits to society. When we look specifically at disaster risk management, the investment in disaster risk management, we're speaking to, in terms of the assets, the beaches and the properties specifically, because that's where the focus is when you talk about reducing the vulnerability of the built environment and the natural environment to hazards. So, and the benefits obviously will be in, maintaining the recreational space, maintaining the coastal tourism product, reducing the losses, reducing losses due to hazards, and also to allowing the businesses within the coastal zone to recover very quickly following extreme events, thereby reducing business disruption and maintaining jobs. So we have to find a way to actually fill in some of this data, because we understand the general flows through the box model, but we're now at the stage where we're going to be seeking to put in some of this data so we can actually quantify some of these benefits. And there are creative economic tools which would allow us to do that. Right, so don't focus too much on this table. I just want you to look at road 5. So over the lifetime, we just borrowed $28 million US from the IDB for the CRMP, the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program. And the question could be, what is the return to the government on that loan? So as part of the program, when the program was completed, there was an evaluation. And this is this is one of the findings of that evaluation. So at row 5, what is being said here is that if you were to look at the benefits derived over the 25-year payment period for the loan, it is approximately $70.4 million US. So you borrowed $28 million. And if you were to look at the benefits derived only from climate change adaptation, progressive climate change adaptation policies, and speaking specifically to the benefits to tourism revenues in terms of the value of the beaches to the tourism product, then we're looking at a $70.4 million US benefit to the country over that 25-year period. So one way of looking at it is each development, each land parcel has a role to play in achieving this target going forward. So just to sum it up, we're not turning all into accountants, and we are not in any way going to seek to monetize the natural resources to enter into some type of bartering or trade, but it is a complementary tool. We're going to maintain the focus of natural resource protection and beach erosion management, but we need to understand the economic benefits and quantify them. Well, we understand the economic benefits of the controls and the policies that we are seeking to implement. And we believe that in doing so, there'll be a realization of the importance of maintaining the benefit flows, and give developers a clear incentive to follow the guidelines. So just instead of arguing about maximizing a short-term profit or perceived profit from breaching the guidelines, they'll be seeing the medium to long-term strategy in terms of building sustainably and adhering to our recommendations. So thank you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for that comprehensive analysis of the economic benefits that can be derived from using the policies set out in the plan. Now is your time, colleagues, to answer your questions. We have two methods. You can raise your hand and we will turn the mic over to you where you can ask your questions. You can state your name and your organization, or you can use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen to type in your questions. I noticed that some persons want to be anonymous, but we would like to see who we're talking to in many respects. So I can call you by your first name if you want to remain anonymous, but please let us know which one you will prefer. So remember, raise your hand and we will definitely answer your question. We are set to close at around 8, but I'm sure that we will try to answer as many questions as possible. So I have one question already by an anonymous person in the question and answer feature, and this person asks, so exactly what is the average length of the undercut? And another one, what is the average load bearing capacity along this coast? Panelists, let me know which one of you will answer this question. What is the average length of the undercut and what is the average load bearing capacity along this stretch of coastline? Panelists, which one of you will answer this question? Just raise your hand and let me know. Ricardo, I turn it over to you then.
Hi, yes, thanks, Alison. Well, the GSI work was very comprehensive. And the load bearing capacity is obviously dependent on the type of rock. So you have to look at the cliff type you're referring to within the sector. So it varies. So it has to be a site specific analysis. The undercut also varies significantly. So what we could do is we can look at specific areas. If you have any specific area in mind, you can send in the question to us in relation to that specific area, and the information is available. But it is not a easy task to provide averages because of the kind of variation that occurs.
Hope we've answered your question, colleague. For the panelists, when you're finished, please take down your hand. Any other questions from our attendees? Have we been so comprehensive? I have a question though, and someone called today, they didn't leave a name, and asked the question, if I have a property on the coast, it's a general question, and the lot is not enough to allow me to obtain the 30-meter setback distance at the beach, am I still allowed to build on this on my lot? I cannot make the 30-meter setback. Am I still allowed to build on my lot? Panelists, let me know which one of you will entertain this question for me. And that's Fabian. Fabian, go right ahead.
Hello, good night, everyone. Well, let me start by drawing reference to what we will all be familiar with along the coastline, particularly the west and south coast, which are both coastal segments, west and south coast, that is densely developed, which would have suffered the effects of coastal erosion over the years, and which would have also seen some engineering intervention from time to time as the need arises. So the simple answer to that question would be yes, unless there is some extraordinary or extenuating circumstances that would lead us to the opposite recommendation. But let me explain why. You already would have had a development use rate in place for the particular lot. The lot would have been neighbored in many instances by existing development, and there may even have been historical development on that site, which more or less has established that development rate. So what we normally do is to ask people or developers to hold that line, that building line. Do not go any further seaward than the neighboring developments on site. There are some developers, for example, that would come. They would purchase 4 and 5 housing lots that were probably previously occupied by charter houses, etc. And there are a few examples of those. And hence they would have amalgamated lots and created a substantial area of building space now. And it creates the opportunity for the improvement of the setback. So in a sense, then that slate would have been wiped clean. You now have a new development space. And there are examples where, based on the submitted plans, you could clearly see that a 30-meter setback minimum can be achieved based on the amalgamated lot size. And in those instances, and I can think of one quite clearly more in the north of the island, that such a proposal would have happened, and the developer would have complied to our recommendations. The first proposal that came in, they wanted to be, I think it was probably 10 meters from the high water mark or so, because there was an existing structure there. But because they amalgamated so many lots, it created a wonderful opportunity to increase the setback, and they in fact achieved the 30-meter setback from the high water mark. And you could literally go to that particular location and see the difference. And at the moment, when you have the seasonal storm surge that it will happen every year, be it from the winter swells, or as we know, go into the hurricane season, that property would have had, because of that increased setback, significantly reduced vulnerability to coastal hazards such as storm surge. We still have too many people seeking to breach that established building line along the coastline and go seaward onto beaches. Literally sometimes, I mean, 5-foot steps you're in the water, and they see absolutely nothing wrong with it. We are certainly not going to encourage those individuals to make themselves more vulnerable, sorry, and their properties more vulnerable. Okay, but we at least try to respect the established development use rights for the property and ask people not to make themselves any more vulnerable than they would already are, and their neighbors are already than their neighbors, etc. Because if it's not a residence, you don't want to lose your investment. Homes are one of the major investments that any one person can make in a lifetime, other than starting a business. And two, if it's a business itself, be it a restaurant, hotel, nightclub, etc., that you will find on the coast, you have it's your business. You don't want to have your business at risk of coastal hazards. And two, the people you employ, they're dependent on you to have the infrastructure, the building itself in a relatively safe location, so that, as Mr. Arthur pointed out, in the event that we have that nature gets upset and we have those rough seas, and we will, like, as soon as the all clear is given by the Department of Emergency Management, that your staff can get back to the business of working, earning an income, providing for their families. This is what it's about. So the plan is not necessarily designed to disadvantage anyone. It is simply there to increase the resilience of this country. And within the context of development planning, one property at a time as those applications come in, to safeguard employment, to safeguard the housing plan, to safeguard the economic engines of this country, which primarily exists on the coastline, being our coastal tourism infrastructure. It's not just tourism, it's coastal tourism. Okay, look at the location of all of our towns: Bridgetown, Oistins, Piketown, Whole Town, all on the coast, the banks, places of work, densely populated housing plants in these areas. It's really no joke. It's serious, and our country depends on it. Look at what happened last night from a simple downpour and a few high winds. Imagine if it was a bona fide hurricane. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
I just want to add, though, that to Fabian's comment, in that we have a lot of scientific information where we look at applications. It is not just looking at the boundaries, but we also look at the type of coastline, whether it's eroding, whether it's accreting. We use a variety of tools to assess any development application. The other issue is, now that we have something called the National Coastal Risk Information and Planning Platform, we can use that to determine, for example, should this person raise their floor level? Should, for example, the bottom floor be used for parking instead of livable spaces? So those are the type of recommendations. While you may be in advance of the 30-meter setback, there are various tools which we can use to lessen the impact of the hazards that we face along the coast. So, for example, you can raise, as I mentioned, you can raise your floor level. You can have your bottom level on columns, for example. If you remember from that hurricane which was over the Bahamas for such a long period of time, there was one house where they took a video showing that they were not severely impacted by the storm surge in the Bahamas. So tools that we use will help us to assess any development application, not only the setback. Any other questions? Or Fabian, you seem like if you want to add something else, remember, we have to be very succinct and provide the person with the information.
Yes, I just wanted to add to your point further. Alison made very accurate points, but I just want to caution that with those points in place, we have some entities would want to use those very points. I can raise the elevation of the ground floor. I can create a seawall, etc., to say this is the reason why no, I can come even closer to the sea to offset the setback recommendation. But we have to recognize that they all work in tandem, and they all serve a public purpose as well, to keep the beach in place in terms of the integrity of its width, because the beach serves as a habitat for endangered species such as the turtles, and the list can go on. And it also serves as a social recreational space for all Barbadians, tourists, and visitors to the country as well. So it can't necessarily be viewed as real estate to develop. And we can't necessarily use some of the initiatives, the mitigation measures as outlined by Alison as an excuse to come further seaward. So I just wanted to make that point, that the setbacks and those additional measures can work in tandem to collectively reduce the vulnerability to coastal hazards. Thank you.
Jonathan, you wanted to add something to this as well. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Fabian.
Yeah, thank you, Fabian. And thank you, Alison. I'm conscious we have about half an hour left. I wanted to try and move that last interesting discussion, but to focus on sub-area 4, and particularly with reference to one of the tools of the plan, maybe to elicit discussion with the panel plus the attendees. And this is to do with the recreational asset of sub-area 4. And as a tourist, when I come to Barbados, this sub-area is unique. It's a wonderful stretch of coast. That walk from River Bay to Cove Bay is wonderful for numerous reasons. Firstly, you keep away from tourists. And secondly, you're seeing the wonderful Atlantic coast. However, issues such as the implication from a safety perspective need to be addressed. Plan does focus on that with regard to improving recommendations for beach and cliff safety. But it'd be good to get attendees or the panel's perspective on the implication of and the relationship with the NCC and the Coastal Zone Management Unit on how coastal recreation can be sustainably pursued for this sub-area from an economic perspective, as Ricardo talked about, but also from a human safety perspective. I mean, I remember walking along there and seeing quite regularly local fishermen's temporary ladders going down the cliff face onto the very secluded coves. And this is a common issue. So my question is one for everybody. What are your views on the future management of this length of coast, and how can collectively a sustainable coastal recreation approach be adopted that keeps the economy going, local communities engaged, but also keeps safety issues at a premium? So I'm going to pose that to everybody to maybe elicit that discussion, knowing we have 25 minutes left.
Anyone wants to start the discussion on this particular matter? Okay, I see Fabian again. Go ahead, Fabian.
Still muted, Fabian.
You're muted.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Apologize. I would provide a perspective based on past experience I would have had. And this is yet another example which would require a collaborative effort, a partnership, not only with the Coastal Zone Management Unit and other entities such as the Ministry of Tourism, okay, which has that legal mandate to manage the tourism sector. It would also require partnership with agencies such as the Natural Heritage Department, which manages that space in the context of the Barbados National Park, for which this coastal segment, this sub area falls into the more northern reaches of the national park. And all of these areas, for example, Little Bay, we know that you have tourists down there, the coach buses will bring them down. There have been Segway tours of that coastal segment in terms of the landscape. It's very scenic. You have the Animal Flower Cave and Piccadilly Reef, and you know, all of these areas that off the beaten path, so to speak, but still very popularly used by tourists and visitors alike to the island. So therefore, it would require a development strategy. We would have had meetings in the past in terms of looking at what the Ministry of Tourism can do to upgrade areas, scenic areas. For example, in some of the areas that we covered before on the East Coast, other interesting sites like Morgan Lewis and areas like Little Bay and stuff like that. If such things are developed further, you would hope that the required infrastructure would be minimum, because you don't necessarily want to ruin the landscape by having it overbuilt per se, but just providing the basic amenities that will allow people to go and enjoy the space and create an interest in terms of not only preserving the landscape, but to improve on the natural amenity in terms of vegetation and so on and so forth, and removal of garbage. Because if you go to Little Bay, you can see piles of debris dumped there by trucks, would have see fridges and piles of construction debris along certain areas. And then you have the water courses that will bring solid waste down from inland areas. So it requires a multi-agency approach. And if it's under the umbrella of tourism, that would be probably the lead agency, in which of course the Zone Management Unit, and then in terms of the Natural Heritage Department, in terms of, and then how it marries with the National Park Plan, which seeks to preserve the natural characters of these areas, but to encourage economic activity at the same time for those individuals that will reside in the areas, particularly the major settlements in the national park, border, the 3Bs, Bordens, Bashable, Belle Plaine, and then you will have the other smaller settlements in the area that can bring employment to the communities on that side of the island. So that is my particular take on the question. If any other panelists would have a different perspective or alternative perspective, I would hand over to them. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to take on this?
Thanks, Fabian. I think that's what's a good point there that you raised is this whole collaborative angle, and that's one of the pillars of this new revised ICZM plan. And I think that where the opportunity arises for consistency of message, this is where the ICZM plan in its current format has got this suite of actions, and in those actions for sub-area 4, it's good to note that, you know, a lot of the high percentage of those actions are, you know, they're assigned to a range of groups to get together to come up with an appropriate way forward. So, you know, what Fabian said is exactly right, but the message of this revised ICZM plan is a collaborative approach. It's based on existing science, but it's not preventing, you know, development. It is making sure that anything that moves forward is undertaken in a sustainable and risk resilient manner and is demonstrated of international best practice. And I think this is where Barbados should be applauded, because It is promoting its own brand of international best practice. And you know, the action plans set up are broad and inclusive enough to encourage these best practices to learn and be iterative in their way forward. And coastal paths and the recreation potential for sub-area 4 is certainly something for broad discussion in the coming years.
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful though, in that we go to those communities in the area to find out what they want. In many instances, I mean, what we are doing is good in terms of the public consultation for a broad general plan such as this. But for individual plans for communities like at River Bay and Little Bay, we need to have consultants to consult with those people within those particular communities. While we might think that is a good idea to bring lots of tourists or activities there, some of the residents might not like that idea at all. So we have to be very careful. And not only that, those communities there and the features there are a virtual science lab for students. I remember, along with Fabian, we've taken many students at River Bay to show them the caves, the arcs, the stacks, the blowholes, and then at Cove Bay to show them the stack, which is on the open field. So it's a virtual lab to show you how Barbados was uplifted. So we have to be very careful how we proceed with any proposal for those areas. Any other questions that the attendees and participants would like to pose to the panelists? We have a wide cross section of skills at the unit and within the our consultants. We have our marine biologists, our planners, our engineers. We are here to answer your questions about this sub area in particular, but we can also answer general questions. Please feel free to raise them with us at this point in time. We're eager to answer your questions. I don't see any questions at this point in time. Perhaps Jonathan, you can do the last two polls.
Certainly, Alison. I'm happy to do that. I think what we'll do is on the screen you will see the final two polls, which before I pass over to Antonio. These are representative of the good homework that everybody's said they'd done on that very first question, which is their interpretation of the detail of this 2020 updated plan. So this question is getting your perspective on the following. How highly would you rate the intentions of the updated ICZM plan? You've heard a very strong focus on, from Fabian and from the panel and from my presentations, in terms of the risk resilient ICZM focus. So the intention is stressed very in detail within the plan. So what is your perspective? Do you think the intentions are excellent or poor? I think we'll get the results through. We have a collective, if we look at very good and excellent, I think we've got quite a high rating, 11% fair. We'll take that on board. The final question is linking through to the updated ICZM plans and policies and actions. Do they make you feel more confident that the future management of this sub-area will be more resilient to climate change and disasters in the future? Do you agree with that statement? You either strongly disagree with it or strongly agree. And the focus is how confident do you feel that the future management of sub-area 4 will be addressed in a more climate and disaster resilient manner? we're getting a very strong feedback. So we'd like to thank you very much for that analysis. And I will now pass over to Antonio, who will give the final wrap up.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. We have now come to the close of the public inquiry process for sub-area 4, which is the Choyce to North Point. We didn't get many questions, so I'm hoping that means that the information delivered tonight was properly assimilated. And but even so, having had the information and you haven't looked at the planners yet, I would really encourage you now, having this background, to go back now and take a look at the plan. And please, if you have any comments or queries, to send them to us through our website at www.coastal.gov.bb or through our WhatsApp number, which is 256-3173. And at this point, I wish you all a good night and ask you to enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you. There's an exit poll that's going to come out at the end of this, so please stay tuned and fill it for us, please.
Let me interrupt you, Antonio. There's one question from Paula Smith. So if Carlos can turn on her microphone so that Paula can raise her question. Paula?
Hi, I think you were misinformed. I didn't actually have a question.
I saw your hand raised.
Oh, sorry, that must have been by mistake.
All right, that's all right. Thank you anyhow.
I would like to say though that I've attended a number of the presentations and I found them to be very comprehensive and well presented. So
we appreciate it, Paula. Thank you so very much. All panelists and attendees, please remember there's an exit poll at the end of this evening's proceedings. So attendees, please feel free to complete that poll for us. We really need your feedback on the information. I want to thank you on behalf of the director of the unit and our consultants from IH Cantabria for a wonderful evening. We look forward to welcoming you to our next meeting, which is on Monday. And that will feature from North Point to Maycox Bay, 6 p.m. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a good night. Thank you, everyone.